the first question. Now, in your book, you've traced many people, I say, would trace the you trace the incel movement back to sort of the early 4chan forums like RK, R9K. But obviously, most people started paying attention to this issue, and the Elliot Rodger attack happened in 2014, and that's when people sort of really started paying attention. But I guess this goes much further back than that, the whole incel movement, the whole sort of Manosphere thing, and the Black Pill movement. So just in your own words, can you explain how the sort of early internet culture helped shape the ideology of this movement and basically the origins of movement in general? Where did this all start?
Yeah, I think some people who have researched incels know that the term incel actually originated in the 90s in this kind of like small forum started by this woman student, actually, kind of ironically. And that was kind of a different type of incel. That had an incel with a V inside of it. It was kind of more, it was even differently like typed. But where I think what we see today really took off was on this forum, which was a part of 4chan, which is R9K. R9K was a really interesting kind of like forum because basically it was moderated by a robot, and the robot would delete posts that were similar to other posts. It was all about originality. And it was supposed to kind of create this kind of very original type forum. So kind of like early AI in a way. So the users of R9K really wanted to have a post on R9K. And they kind of figured out that the only thing really original was to talk about their own lives, because the robot would see that as different. And it was different because everyone's lives are kind of different. But because you had a bunch of teenage boys on this forum, a lot of their own lives, when they started talking, were quite like vulnerable, or issues that they were having, and mostly issues that you would like think about that teenage boys would be having around sex, girls, body image, feeling insecure. And the type of people who were drawn to 4chan in the first place were often these kind of more isolated teenagers who didn't have a lot of friends in real life, who spent a lot of time on the internet, who spoke and tried to make friends on the internet more. So ironically, even though all these posts were original, they all started taking on the same type of topics around kind of depression, nihilism, feeling a bit like ugly. And then women became like a really kind of like prevalent topic. So while there were some women on the forum themselves, there were much more men. And so there was a lot more talking about women, like about dating girls, about teenage girls, about what they liked, didn't like, or kind of feelings of rejection. So kind of organically from that, they all started to kind of realize that they were really similar, and kind of creating a weird kind of organic ideology around girls like hot guys, or girls like guys who are 6 foot and shocks, and they don't like us, and we're the losers, and we're always going to be the losers. And then they started naming themselves robots because of the robot moderator of the forum. So they even had like inside lingo that they began to kind of use. So the incel forums that we see today are taking directly from the same kind of attitudes and ways of speaking and kind of just themes of this original R9K board. And I think what that means really in what we can see today is that if you were to ban every single incel forum off the internet, and if the word incel just disappeared in the next 10 years, there is a real kind of, I think it's like the risk, I guess you want to say, that it's going to happen again, because it happened so organically in the first place around these real grievances on this forum, that it's likely to kind of reemerge all the time, because this is kind of the stuff that people talk about online, especially teenage boys. So I found that really interesting. And there's like a topic of that in the book, but I go into the ideology more. But it was just to show that even if you were to get rid of incels tomorrow, you probably would not stamp out the grievances that led there, and it would kind of reemerge in a different way as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, onto a timeline. Did you mention the timeline, or what time of year are we talking?
Well, I mean, I guess 4chan really hit it big in like 2004, 2005. And then the R9K board was kind of like maybe 07, 08, 09. So it was kind of when people started like using these forums where they can talk to each other, you know, easily and freely, basically. Kind of really around when the internet really took off as well. So
Sure. Okay, and in your book, you make a lot of references to popular culture, film, TV. Why was that? Why did you use sort of popular culture as the main lens to understand incels?
Yeah, I think like when I first had the idea of writing this book, I wanted to write on incels, but I wanted to write it in a way where people who never knew anything about incels could just understand it. And it's really difficult to kind of just explain incels to people who've never heard of it. It's easier now because of adolescence and all this media. But back when I was writing it, I was telling my friends about it. It was just really difficult to kind of tell them what these people were like and what they believed in. But then I realized it was actually really easy if you started using movies to explain it, like, oh, they're like the kind of nerdy characters, like Screech from Saved by the Bell, or, you know, this nerd, like from this TV show. It doesn't really matter. The trope was already there. And then I realized that incels themselves were aware of this and actually based a lot of their ideology from kind of these media tropes we've seen. And these media tropes, I mean, media reflects real life, but it also kind of like gives cues to how people live, especially when they're younger and they're watching like narrative TV. It could be teenage centric kind of narratives, but it could also just be like general movies like Taxi Driver or Marvel movies like fantasy, where these tropes are still really apparent. And so a lot of the incels themselves were already referring to themselves like, oh, I'm like the Joker character, or I'm like this character from this thing, in order to explain how they see the world and what they see themselves. So I realized that media was really easy to explain incels, but also media was how incels explain their world. And when it kind of came down to it, when you're talking about teenagers and young people in their early 20s, they're not necessarily relating themselves to like higher political or socioeconomic things going on. They're not going to mention labor movements. They're not going to mention like pay gaps or whatever in a real way, but they are going to mention she's a Stacy like a cheerleader and he's a jock like a Chad, and like all these very like tropes that we see and we can all kind of recognize. And I think that's really interesting because it's like a Rosetta Stone, because of course these are people who live in our world. Like they're not aliens, which I keep saying in the book. They don't come with their own ideology, and separate to other ideologies before, where like the far right has a long history, like going back now over 100 years, and so does Islamist ideologies, where they have these historical moments where they can relate or kind of go back to and see the ideology. Incels just kind of take from what they see around their media. They don't need like history of like other incel movements or what happened in another country. They just see TV and they relate life to that, but they may not admit it. But that's kind of how they do it. But also that's how a lot of younger people do it in general as well. So I just thought it was a really kind of interesting way to build that gap or build that bridge as well.
So so on that point, so say someone like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver or the Joker, are you saying that those people actually are influencing the way incel, like almost celebrating this kind of outsider character, and they're almost being influenced by that to behave in a certain way?
Yeah, I definitely think like Travis Bickle has been a huge influence in the incel world. I mean, so many of the incels I interviewed for this book mentioned him, even though they were like in their early 20s, and this is a movie from the 70s now. I was surprised they even had that, like, you know, that movie that they had watched, but they had watched that movie because they had heard of it in their spaces. So they didn't watch the movie and become incel. They'd kind of joined the incel kind of movement a little bit and then saw people talking about it, watched the movie, and then said, oh my God, that's me. Like getting a diagnosis like from a therapist. They were like, I'm Travis, I'm Joker, I'm, you know, whoever it might be from their own kind of media that represents how they feel. And that's kind of the beauty of media as well, is also to show these representations of characters that, you know, are isolated or lonely or different to us, and representing how they feel in a really raw way. And so that's why movies like Taxi Driver did a really good job at kind of like showing that kind of outsider and how kind of mental health can spiral, how things can go out of control, how nobody noticed he was suffering. Even though he told people, nobody really seemed to take him seriously. And these are things that incels really resonate with. And so I suppose that's why they kind of cling on to these characters. And I think it's not, I never want to say like the media is to blame, because like I want movies like Taxi Drivers, but I also want other movies that show outsiders in a more kind of positive way or a positive ending for them. And that's kind of become far in between, and incels are talking about that a lot as well, the lack of representation.
Yeah. So in the book, you talk a lot about the nerd character. And obviously Travis Bickle wasn't a nerd, and the Joker isn't a nerd as such. They're outsiders. But within the incel community, is your argument that the nerd is something that's almost celebrated, and it's an archetype that they think is cool? And how is the kind of the nerd character, that's our archetype, how has that influenced how incels see themselves?
It's really funny because before I heard incels talking about it, I was, again, trying to explain incels to a friend of mine who doesn't work anywhere near this area. She's a scientist. This is not her thing. And I couldn't really think about what to say because she asked me point blank, what's an incel? And the first thing I said was, oh, they're kind of like the nerdy guy, you know, the nerdy guy that you see in TV, or the nerdy guy that you might have known in college. And that was like a really quick kind of shorthand way to show kind of some of the traits and ideas around incels that we have today. And so when I realized that, I kind of took that to some of the incels I was interviewing. I said, what do you think about this representation of a nerd? Like, do you see yourselves as that? I mean, there's been positive representations and negative throughout the course of the last 50 years as the term nerd was developed, especially in the Fonz or Happy Days in the 50s. So it's been around for quite a while. So that kind of trope. And I think a lot of the incels had a lot to say on that. Like, yes, they felt like that was them. They can understand the awkwardness, the quirkiness. Sometimes things go right, things go wrong. But that kind of person was someone that they related to as, that's me, when they were watching TV or media and feeling comfortable almost. And that, especially when it was positively represented in the early 2000s, especially. But now we're seeing this kind of change of that archetype as well in our media, which I think is really interesting, because like a lot of incels had a lot to say about how the nerds are hot, and there's a lot of memes online about like the nerds are hot, when, you know, this meme of like, when she says she wants a nerd, she means, and they insert like some beautiful model wearing glasses, you know, and that's kind of like the joke now, is that this kind of archetype has been, I guess, like gentrified, but in a kind of more physically attractive way, which I think is kind of saying something more. And I've seen articles now written about it by journalists and kind of film critiques about how this archetype that was once for the boys who didn't feel like they matched up to physical kind of, you know, standards, could feel like, okay, well, look, I'm the guy who's funny, who makes jokes and reads comic books, and that's okay. But now that seems to be different. Now you still need to be as good looking as, I guess, the jock character in order to even be that character. And if you were to be the awkward guy, there's a new term being used in media, and that is incel. And incel coming with the connotations of misogynist, school shooter, violent, creepy, and then that being labeled on to the same character who, you know, the awkward guy who doesn't fit in, who gets things wrong. And that's a kind of a dangerous situation now. We saw it with the TV series Euphoria did it, but there's been others coming out kind of doing that. And I think that puts a lot of these guys, teenage boys and people in your 20s, kind of more in fear of being a little socially awkward, and even having even more anxiety of going out and even talking to people as friends, because they're so afraid now of being labeled as incel, which is a lot worse than being labeled as nerd. So the nerds seem to be kind of cool and like tech bros and guys who like gaming but still look attractive or still socially savvy. And for the ones who didn't fit in, they've kind of been left behind and kind of like put in this basket of potentially creepy, weird incel. And that's the irony of a lot of incels I met. They were like, I was called an incel before I found the incels, you know, so I don't know, I guess I fit here. So that's also another part I thought was kind of interesting coming in.
Yeah, so you alluded to women in relationships, and that seems to be at the heart of this. So in the book, you talk about incels feeling lied to about women in relationships, you know, that the fact that they were sold this false promise by the media and society, and that resulting in a sort of disillusionment, which obviously results in a sort of grievance that goes beyond just access to sex. It goes way beyond that. There's a whole worldview around women in relationships. Can you explain what the lie is that they believe they've been sold? What do you think they've been lied about?
Yeah, and I think that's like a core part of the ideology as well. It's not necessarily that, oh, I tried asking girls out and they don't like me. It's I was lied to by society, which is a core part of many extremism ideologies as well. The lie. And that's why when you think the blue pill or like the world is not what you think it is, then you start to see everything as conspiratorial or the opposite. Well, that's if you swing the pendulum, if you're one of those people. So they've kind of seen when they were growing up, they were like watching Star Wars. One of them said like Princess Leia. I thought all women were going to be like Princess Leia. It was just this bastion of pure and hope, and she's loyal and she's really perfect all the time and she looks beautiful. And I'm like, well, that's not the case. And of course, most boys and men, they get over that. They realize, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, women aren't Angelina Jolie or aren't this character I've always grown up with. That's normal. But some of these guys, I think, don't really grasp that because they have very little kind of social exposure. And I think that they kind of start to realize that what the image of woman was in their mind that they feel they were exposed to through media is not what they're coming across in real life. And that hits hard when you're 16, 17, 18. I've even spoken to guys who aren't in the misogyny movement who, you know, said the same thing, that like some of these kind of realizing women weren't kind of always nice or always going to laugh at your jokes, and maybe they'd laugh at you. And this kind of like potential cruelty, that which is human, coming from women, or flaws, or being angry, or whatever, or messing around. These normal, natural human emotions, they were like, oh my God, women have those too. And I wasn't used to that. And that's so opposite to what I thought. And I think that kind of speaks to a lot of this kind of how in media, women, even when they're put in like positions of power, they're still kind of flawless, or they're still bastions of purity or hope, and they're always the moral compass. They're not the ones making mistakes. They're the ones guiding. And I think that's kind of this kind of maternally aspect that a lot of men maybe in their younger years can't always get over quick enough to kind of handle women in their own lives. And that's why the frustrations come in when they hear stories like, you know, a woman cheated on her husband, and that starts to hit hard, like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. When, you know, we grow up with media that shows men cheating all the time. Like I said in the book, like in Mad Men, the very first episode, we meet Don Draper, our protagonist, our kind of good guy, and he's just flagrantly cheating on his wife, and we're okay with that. We accept it. It's a little shocking, but we're like, yeah, that makes sense. And so we grow into this world where we know like men can make mistakes, men can do the bad thing, but I think a lot of our media still has to catch up to that with how women are portrayed, especially in media targeted towards boys and men in those younger years as well. And that's the kind of lie that they're talking about, kind of like this idea of perfection, or like saving me, a woman's going to save me, or be my mother, or be my guide, and that being not how it is, and resenting being told that in the first place.
So there's a clash between the reality and what they've learned from popular culture, and the two aren't really matching. Surely the problem there is they've taken things from popular culture and taken it a bit too seriously, I suppose. But on that point about gender tropes, again, something you touch on in your book, you know, gender tropes around men and masculinity, gender tropes about women and their role and how they should be behaving. When you looked into that from the point of view of incels, did you come across something that really surprised you? And within that, did you also see influence of white supremacy?
So there's a lot of gender tropes in media that I think we all take cues from. I mean, we all have to be really honest about that. Like there's a reason why loads of young men go to the gym like crazy to get six packs, to get bodies that like look like Jason Momoa or Chris Hemsworth after they go to see Thor or, you know, Aquaman. There's a reason why like some men think being aggressive is manly but crying is not, and that's been around since the dawn of time. And, you know, to be the cool cowboy, that was exactly what you have to do. And today people like to think, oh, we've moved past that, but actually if you really look at a lot of the movies coming out, have we moved past it? And this, it doesn't seem so. So sometimes the messages we're getting, you know, through very well-meaning like organizations or PSAs in school, like boys can cry, it's okay, really strike against the movies or whatever they've seen recently, not the MMA fights or Top Gun or whatever, and even the politicians that seem to be doing really well, for better or for worse, they don't seem to be taking on these ideas of vulnerability. So it's really hard when you're a young guy and you're like, okay, I'm told I'm allowed to be vulnerable. I'm told I'm allowed to say I'm scared. I'm told I'm allowed to say I'm like anxious or awkward. But actually, it feels like when I say that, I'm actually going against the grain here. And really, I should just stick to the norm, stick to the book. And that's kind of the situation that a lot of incels say as well. It's just like all these like messages seem to just be like placating them, but not being real, not like matching up to real life. And same thing with women. I mean, like women also take like their cues a lot of time from some media, especially when they're younger, especially around body image. There's a reason why a lot of, you know, plastic surgery is on the uptick as well, and looking at like big celebrities who are doing that. So it's not like any of us are immune to this. It's not like we walk out our door away from a media environment and live this like natural life that was untouched by everything we've just seen on the internet and seen in the cinema and wherever it might be. That's just not possible. So, and on that point, because we live in the West, yes, there's a white supremacist element to it. Now, when I say white supremacist, maybe that's a bit of a harsh word. Maybe like this kind of idea of whiteness being a bit more beautiful, or being a bit more of the norm. So again, a lot of incels coming to me who were not white from the UK, talking about, you know, where are like, you know, people who aren't white being represented in these nerdy characters, especially when I was talking about the nerd. They were like, the true nerd is an Asian guy who nobody likes. And I'm like, oh, why is that? He's like, because I'm an Asian guy that nobody likes. And I'm like, okay. He's like, if you're white, that doesn't count because you're cool enough. If you're white, you're cool enough just by being white, which is a really interesting way that they were saying it, like white being a ticket out of kind of the lowest rung of society. And then obviously I'd meet white incels who would have a lot more to say and say, no, that's not true. We're as bad as that. You know, they'd never see their own whiteness as a privilege as well. So there's kind of an interesting push and pull dynamic there, but it's all to do with how you look and how you are seen. And in our media, we're still seeing a lot of white faces in cooler or more beautiful or more sexy positions, and kind of few and far between people who aren't white who make it like that. People tend to be able to name. And I feel like if you can name every single, you know, non-white person who played a cool character or plays cool characters, that means that there aren't enough. Necessarily. So that's why there's this kind of dynamic of push and pull as well, with whiteness being seen as a privilege, which actually rightfully in media is at this stage.
Sean, you touched on two quite different points there. One about, you talked about the Asian nerd. Are people like that, are they sort of internalizing white supremacy, or are they reporting their experiences of racism, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's like what you see. I mean, honestly, like there's a reason why, you know, when a non-white character is even put up for the role of James Bond, that the internet goes mad, angrily mad. And these guys are just seeing that. You know, it's not like they're immune to the backlash. They can see who was saying, you know, Sydney Sweeney should be the best woman ever and she's what all women should be, and that's a commonly said thing on some sites like X. Or they can see that people are elevated, like certain celebrities are elevated in looks wise more than other celebrities, why Brad Pitt is still seen as the staple of most handsome, and then, you know, all these other white celebrities. So they're not lying to themselves. I think they're just noting how the world is reacting in the West to certain looks and to certain faces. So, you know, it's kind of hard to say, you know, is it white supremacy in their mind, or is it actually just this genuine reaction and that they're a bit more sensitive to potentially. But at the same time, they're living in a world where it is still true. What they're seeing is still true. It's just kind of up to them, I guess, to kind of find their ways to nuance around it or ignore it or kind of move past it. And also it's race and body image as well, stature, height, you know, all these different things, weight. So it's race, but it's also other physical attributes as well that they're thinking of.
And is that becoming a gateway to sort of wider far-right narratives, or are the two very separate?
I mean, I think incels wouldn't really see themselves as far right necessarily. They'll see themselves as more apolitical. Like I really like, I mean, there's some incels who, yeah, absolutely would be far right, and they have their little funny pictures of Hitler or whatever as their icons, like, you know, they're trying to prove a point. But I think a lot of incels actually see themselves as just nihilist. And that's why they're more likely to kind of follow the paths of this kind of more extreme nihilism we're seeing today, and to kind of celebrate violence for violence sake, or celebrate taking down society for just the fun of it. One of my favorite comments I ever saw on the incel forum was after the last election, and one incel said, I don't ironically vote for Kamala Harris because I think the world would end if she was president. And I was like, that's the kind of thing they'll say, you know, these big misogynists will say this, because what they're actually looking for is just kind of anger, and they're not really like, they don't really see a hope. And in white supremacy, there's a weird hope, like not a negative hope, a terrible hope. Their hope is an ethno state. For incels, they're just like, you know what, this whole thing is wrong. This world is wrong. There is no fixing it. But it's fun to see people get angry, maybe get hurt, maybe things going wrong. Division is good. So these kind of things. And this is from the extreme incels, I should say. The guys I interviewed for the book were more kind of not extreme, but these would be the ones on the forum who would be more like that.
Right, so sort of cynical observers with no real goals. Okay, well, you mentioned your interviews, and I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of it for me. You did speak to many incels, didn't you, for your book, and kind of worked with them. From that, just highlight what you think are some of the really interesting stories or observations that came out of the conversations you directly had with incels.
Yeah, I was so surprised at how open they were, because I was really transparent the entire time. So I basically kind of like put out an ad on Twitter almost to say like, writing a book, or, you know, do you want to talk to me about this topic? So like if I was writing a chapter on with men's bodies, I'd be like, does any incel want to talk to me about how they feel about, you know, physical bodies and movies? And sometimes they DM me and I'd say, by the way, it's for a book, so is that okay with you? I will never name you. But like what you say, I'd like to put in the book, but like just if that's okay. Like only one guy ever said no. Most of them were like, oh yeah, no, that's really good. Like I'd love to be in a book. And I'm like, okay, you're you know, you won't be in the book with your real name, but like that'll be, I guess, you. So they were a lot more open than I thought they'd be. But I think they really kind of also had the invested idea that they want the world to kind of see who they are, which is really fair. Like, you know, how we all want to be seen for who we are, not kind of labeled. And some of the stories that they would say would be quite kind of dramatically sad sometimes. But in a very kind of like teenage or younger person way. Like one guy was saying that he'd never gotten invited to a party before, and he said I could put it in the book as well. He'd never gotten invited to a party before, and then in his first year in university in America, there was a massive after football party happening in someone's house that everyone was invited to apparently, and someone I think said to him, oh, you want to come to a party, or, and walked away. And I think he just followed the crowd, and whatever happened, he came to the door and they opened the door and they were like, you're not coming in, not you, and closed it, and that was the end. And that was the only time he ever got invited to a party, and it wasn't even real. And it was a real Carrie moment, like from Stephen King kind of novel. Like it was a kind of a moment where you're like, I can remember being 19, and if that happened to me, I don't know how my self-esteem would have handled that. Like at 19, you're so fragile, you're so new, and that to happen, as well as other things in your life not going well, just feels like that just feels like a lot. There was another guy who told me that he tried to flirt with a girl one time when he was a teenager after watching the movie Blade Runner, the original one with Harrison Ford, where the scene in that is pretty aggressive, actually. Like from our perspective now, it would be almost like assault, kind of is assault. And he thought, oh, that seems to be really cool. Okay, so I'll do that. And he went into school, and just as he was about to do a kind of like teenage version of it, kind of started, and she started laughing at him. And he was like, thank God she did, because if I had gone the full way, I don't know, I think I would have been expelled. Like, I don't think that was a good idea. And I said, no, that was definitely a terrible idea. So again, he was taking cues from a movie he had seen at only 50 and bring that into school. And luckily, nothing bad happened. She started laughing and he was able to take that. But there were these weird moments in time where it's like, oh, I can see how that happens. And that's not so crazily unusual. That's very real life. We can all kind of relate or remember or see how that can track. And just some sad stories as well. People living with mothers who are very ill, people who have diagnoses of schizophrenia, bipolar, very difficult autism. One guy with a very bad physical disability who said that he had to live with his dad for the rest of his life. There's these very sad stories. And then there were stories where like they were a bit more, I guess, able to go back into society, but they were just dealing with a lot of anxiety around it and just kind of fear. So a variety of different types of situations as well.
I don't want to go more into the pop culture thing and some of the interventions, but you mentioned autism. Is there a strong correlation between incels and autism?
Well, I've never done the study, and I don't know the study. Like I don't know how you can really track that necessarily. I think people have tried to by scraping the forums or by doing a mass survey of incels. I think the problem is I think a lot of incels may self-diagnose, and that's also a trend in younger people today in general, self-diagnosing with general issues. And the problem with self-diagnosing is that that doesn't always work. What I would say is like, a few of the guys I interviewed for the book had autism. And then a few of the guys I interviewed for the book had other things, like schizophrenia. And there were some guys who had nothing, who were just normal, like not normal, but like just neurotypical. And so in order to kind of place autism, I think autism is something that we should talk about more with incels, because it complicates intervention a bit more, and it means like you have to take that into consideration, and also understanding how that intertwines with the ideology, with the very black and white thinking, and also with the isolation aspect. But I'm not sure how much it overlaps necessarily at this moment. I will say that one of the problems with incels is that a lot of our intervention tactics for extremism is to get people back into a circle of friends, or like a social network, like whether that be your school, your wherever, just, you know, hang out with people. That helps you get off the internet, talk to your friends, talk to your family. That's really difficult when the source of your ideology is from isolation. Then how can we say, oh, well, have you tried, you know, talking to a friend instead of being online? It's like, the reason I'm online is because I have no friends, actually, and that is literally the grievance. So that is actually a really difficult one to square with a lot of incels, especially the ones who really do want to try and get back in. And, you know, it's like starting from zero, which is tough when you're perfectly neurotypical and confident to bits. So when you're, you know, very socially anxious, and maybe you're autistic or you have other things going on, it's just such a mountain to climb, and it needs such support as well.
So you mentioned obviously social isolation playing a big role, so a sense of alienation, marginalization. And I think from that emerges this over-reliance on pop culture for social cues and how to behave, which I think obviously isn't healthy in and of itself. But that leads us to the final question I have for you before we open up to Q&A. Interventions. So if someone is heading down sort of the black pill mindset, and first of all, what do you mean exactly by the black pill mindset? And if someone
I guess, like, in order to kind of simplify it, it's the nihilistic worldview of incels.
What's the ideas for interventions to be possible?
Oh. Sorry, you cut there. I thought you were finished talking. I started talking before you start. Yeah, to simplify it easier, it's just the kind of nihilistic worldview of incels that kind of sees, as we all understand ideologies to be black and white thinking, you know, the world has lied to me, women are cruel, women are nasty, women are picky and shallow, but also kind of dehumanization. One thing I also wanted to touch on, it was before, the grievances I think people think incels have is not being able to have sex. That's what they say on the forums. That's kind of what the shorthand is. That's the masculine form of what they're actually saying. Because what they're actually saying, when you really look at everything they're writing, it's not about sex. Because they've even talked about, you know, would you get a sex worker, blah, 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 blah. It's not about sex. It's about two things. It's about affirming their gender identity, which is being a man, and manhood being intrinsically related to losing your virginity in our modern culture, unfortunately, still today. War and sex has been these kind of arenas where manhood has been kind of found or claimed. And for incels who aren't in war, they don't feel like they've gotten their gender identity as man yet by not having sex. So sex is the gateway to manhood, which is ingrained in our media, which is ingrained in our culture still. And it's really hard to fight that battle when so many of the messages still talk about it. And that's why all those teen sexcapade movies were so big all the time, always centering guys as the ones trying to lose their virginity, never really women, because sex and women is different. Women are more shamed, more likely to be shamed for having sex, and men are more likely to be shamed for not having sex. And that's where the incels lie. So it's affirming their gender identity, but it's also this idea of love, which is something that I think a lot of them maybe they want to say differently because that sounds kind of soppy. But this, like, a lot of the incels ended up saying to me, and especially one in particular, a French guy who was only 20, he was like, I'm terrified that women can't love like men. I don't think they can. I don't think they have that like unconditional, all-encompassing, faithful, loyal love. I think they just look for the most good-looking with the most wealth who can give them the best life. But that's not real love. I want to love like, you know, I want, you know, someone to love me like I love them. And I think that'll never happen for me. That is a real existential dread. If you believe that, if you believe you'll never be loved, in a way that you can love, that sends you into this panic zone that a lot of them are also dealing with, because they've even talked about the fact that if you were to have a girlfriend one day, if you were to leave the incel world and have a girlfriend, you know, she'll never love you. Like, it'll just be because, you know, suddenly you have a bit more money, or your nose looks better, or your hair is a bit nicer, but it won't be real love. Like, and that's also the fear that keeps on giving, and the grievance that kind of builds this resentment, because if women can't love like men, then women aren't human like men. And that's the inferiority, superiority bit, and the dehumanization bit. And that's why they start to really push women down. And then in the most extreme form, that's why they see men are the only real humans and women are kind of like robots or AI, or an AI is basically the same thing as a girl. What's the difference? Neither of them can love. So I'm not seeing a difference here. And that's really where the dehumanization really comes in, I think.
So they've really brought into the hypergamy idea, which is very popular in red pill communities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that is fascinating stuff. So what I'm going to do now is opening up to Q&A. So if you do have any questions, click on the hand icon at the bottom. Those of you not used to Google Meet, I'll take it in order of which I see them. So Selena Reynolds has a question. So I'm going to...
It's Andrew. Sorry, it's under my wife's account. So
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Andrew.
Apologies for that. My
Okay.
question is: do you think the demonization that we put on the Manosphere with people like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, not so much Andrew Tate because he needs to be demonized, but you know the more typical ones? Do you think the demonization of that community is pushing these guys towards the extremes to get into an echo chamber? Ignore what the community is saying about them, and find like-minded groups that pushes them towards the extremes.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because the people that you just mentioned have shifted in their own polars over the last 5 years. Like in 2018, I used to listen to Joe Rogan. He was fine. I used to listen to him talk about aliens all day long. He just loved aliens, like, you know. But now Joe Rogan is talking about vaccine conspiracies and, you know, pushing MAGA. And Jordan Peterson, the same thing. He used to say, "Make your bed." And now he has this kind of rambling ideas of like what is correct and what is not correct. I actually can't follow him anymore. But I think the fear there is more this push towards ultra-conservatism, which I think a lot of people, especially in the US, are really fearful of, because as that kind of push continues, you see more of the issues they see around anti-abortion rhetoric, or not even that rhetoric, it's happened. So I think some of their fears are coming true in that kind of political landscape. And that's why that feels like really important to go against now. But I understand from a young man's perspective, that isn't really nuanced enough. They just see, oh, but Joe Rogan likes fitness and gym, and like, you know, Andrew Tate had some really good things to say about kickboxing. It's like, okay, but if you can trust your own brain to continue to critically piece out this individual from this is the okay stuff they say to this is the part that gets a bit weird, then okay. But why do you have to be so brave when we have so many other, like, I can point to you so many other former military or people who do gym stuff, or people who talk about stuff like Joe Rogan, like even Chris Williamson, who's a Modern Wisdom, that's a podcast, who are better. So if there's a better version, let's go there. Let's not go towards the awkward ones right now. That's what I think. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, thanks for your question, Andrew. If you can mute yourself again, that would be helpful. Any other questions from anyone? Robin Brivio.
Yeah, it's just sort of, can you hear me? Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
On the back of that then, who should we sort of look at for being the poster boy for the incel movement at the moment?
As in a negative poster boy, like?
Well, you know, because I work in education, and so I'm in my late 50s, and to my eternal shame, I didn't know who Charlie Kirk was really until he was shot and killed. So I just want to sort of try and be ahead of the curve in terms of other stuff, like, you know, who are these? Because Andrew Tate, everyone knows about Andrew Tate, but you know, and a few of the others. But is there any sort of like emerging, you know, guys that are sort of gathering a lot of attention from young men?
Yeah, so I should say there's a reason why I didn't mention any influencers like Andrew Tate or Pink State, and it's not because I didn't want to. It's because actually Andrew Tate is not incel. We should have another webinar more on that focus, because I do recognize that what's more popular with young boys potentially is that stream where you don't think you're so ugly you're not going to get a girlfriend. You just think you need to get a little bit more ripped, probably take some steroids, get really rich really fast, get a yacht, and then you're sorted. But also it's the same worldview, but there's this kind of hope ending where if you cheat the system, you're gonna win, just like Andrew Tate did or other people. So that's called the red pill, which is really similar but a little different. Incels really have no hope. So they don't like Andrew Tate. They think he's a grifter. They say, what's the point in going to the gym when your face is ugly? So they're so nihilistic that even these negative hope influencers don't touch them. They don't feel impacted by them. So with your incel character, he's more rare. So he's more likely to already give up on how he looks, more disheveled. He's more likely to not want to talk to anybody. His aggressiveness will be through silence or not wanting to engage he won't want to sit beside girls if he can. And the risk factor, unfortunately, luckily it's more rare, but unfortunately the risks are greater. So there's a more lethality built in there with the potential school violence when it comes to mass school violence. England doesn't have guns, and that's great, but we do have knives and we do have other ways to build bombs. And there have been some thwarted incel attacks, luckily thwarted, with bomb making, crossbows, this kind of thing, crossbows in Scotland. So we have to kind of look at that potential lethality from this type of group, and also just the general, their well-being. They're more likely to be suicidal. They're more likely to be self-harming and self-medicating with alcohol, marijuana. So we have to kind of see this as more of a rarer but kind of immediate situation. The Andrew Tate boys, they need help. That kind of stuff needs help, but at least they're not so close to something quite lethal and dangerous for themselves or others. And we can help them a bit more to guide them out over time, hopefully, as well.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Robin. Anyone else? Any other questions? Samuel Kashti. Over to
Hello.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maeve. It's been interesting. Yeah, so you mentioned about how these grievances they have are genuine grievances, and how like young men not being able to find sexual partners and stuff is a genuine problem, not having any friends. So I'm curious about how, if this has been a problem for a long time, yes, gender roles are changing, and I guess that's the whole red pill element, is that they've realized it's changed a lot. But what of course it started on 4chan, but what role has technology played in the last decade in really reinforcing this, and has it exacerbated it to a significant extent?
Absolutely. I mean, it's amplified it. So you're right to say these grievances have always been around. I mean, the isolated kind of loner character has even been in our literature for a long time. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird, he's, as I said, Taxi Driver's a movie from the 70s that talks about this exact same isolated character going through a mental health spiral. Interestingly enough, also has issues with women that he speaks about in the movie. I think that movie is brilliant. But anyway, to kind of go on, the internet has kind of helped these guys who are only 17 or 16 start to connect with each other. So while in the past, maybe they would have had these issues naturally, people aren't liking me that much, I don't know what to do. Maybe they wouldn't have the influence of this is so normal that we should make an ideology out of it. They might have tried a little harder in college, or just really tried to go to that social club. And you know what, lo and behold, there are other people like them, especially if they do degrees where there are other people who are similar, who are a little bit more shy or awkward. And eventually a lot of these guys kind of bloom, they find their place, and they meet women and they meet men and they meet people eventually, but sometimes they don't. But the internet has made it seem at 17, if you don't have a girlfriend right now, you know what, you never will. And if you do, it's because something malicious is happening. She's using you for something wrong is happening. So this ideology has been seed planted into them through the internet, where 20 years ago they had no exposure to other people talking like this. It was just maybe watching one movie where they could relate to. So yeah, there's that kind of amplification of an ideology happening, where in the past it would have been seen as more of a personal, I guess it's just me who feels this way, I met a friend, the end, and now it feels like I'm stuck, I never will change, and if anything changes, it's all malicious and nefarious and very conspiratorially thinking about the world as well. So yeah, definitely the internet.
But I guess my question is it very decentralized where these like untruths are coming from? Because when you have other instances of radicalization, there's coordinated attempts to, you know, getting people to engage in disinformation. But where's the narrative of where's the lie here? Where are they getting this false information about society from, you know?
Yeah, well, as I kind of like, that's why in the book I definitely stress like the 4chan, as we mentioned at the beginning, the R9K board, it came up really organically through a lot of teenage boys just talking about their struggles with dating and how, like, you know, oh, I like this girl, but she only likes the jock guys. She only likes the football players. And then other guys relating to that and being like, women are picky, which is, you know, stuff that, you know, boys can start to say. That's not necessarily, you know, that's just venting. But then it becomes, oh my God, you feel that, you feel that, you feel that. There's something happening here. It's an ideology. Let's start to create a worldview. And that organic kind of creation, because of the ability to associate online, means that it is organic. It's not top down. It's the narratives aren't coming from a top. It's coming kind of from these platforms where they have the ability to chat to each other. So that sounds really scary, like a beast we can't fight, but it is a beast we can fight if we have enough kind of prevention counter action in schools or at that age in order to help them, or individually, in order to help them again with their gender identity, sexuality, and being able to kind of see the end line of going through that nihilist brain. And talking to a lot of former incels, and the incels in the book at the end were really good at kind of going through that and saying what could help, actually, what's the type of stuff that could get them out, or the type of way you could talk to them, and that being kind of the way to help them kind of not go there, you know, in their minds anyway. That's all I can, at the moment. It's a new world. It's a world that we're not sure of, with this decentralization kind of idea of extremism, but it's a world that we're going to see more of. No more groups, much more kind of lone actors, or coming together and having ideas that kind of come blossom together.
Thank you.
It reminds me, as you were speaking there, about the reason about the Flat Earth Society is that, you know, the fact that they could come together on the internet and form a community is why they exist, even though there might be some people who believe that. So it's the networking effect of technology, I guess, that allows people to form a movement rather than being just isolated individuals. Any other questions from anyone? Matt Vicenti. Over to you, Matt. If you unmute yourself.
There we go. So I was just clicking all the boxes. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It's been incredibly informative. So I am coming from the social media platform, from TikTok, where we are dealing with a lot of incels ourselves. And it's great to hear that you've got this enormous engagement with incels themselves. I'm just wondering, like, from your assessment, how do the individuals that you deal with perceive like perpetrators of mass violence who also identify themselves as incel? Do they idolize them, condemn, or distance themselves? And I'm looking at people like Elliot Rodgers or Jake Davison, multiple individuals who go and conduct some horrific acts and then claim themselves as incels. So just wondering what your observations have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are non-extremist incels who hate all violence. I think Elliot Rodger was, you know, sad case, you know, oh, you know, he went too far. Like, I feel bad for him as an individual for, you know, I guess being so broken that kind of happened, but they don't glorify it. They don't like it. They're afraid of school shooters. Interestingly enough, one of the incels I met was in a school shooting. So there's also other aspects where they've had exposure to violence and they don't like it. Now, when it goes into the extreme side, there are two types of extreme incels. There's the extreme incels who are just full on, like, we love it when it happens. We'll glorify anyone who even mentions incels. They love talking about particular ones: Cho, Virginia Tech, Elliot Rodger, Montreal, 1989. The Toronto, 2018. So there's actually martyrs. There's like a hierarchy. They say, this is the one I most relate to, like their baseball cards. And that's where there's like real problems coming in, you know, with Encyclopedia Dramatica of the scoreboard of all the mass shooters over the last few years. And with the Parkland shooter, he wanted to be on that scoreboard. So we're also seeing this idea of notoriety coming in. And yeah, by the way, there is a huge crossover between school shootings that we've seen in the last few years in America and incels, and also random acts of violence that we've seen and incel. A lot of them seem to have cross-pollinated and moved from one to the other. So they're the ones who will be so overt, and they'll say, yes, absolutely, we'll love it, we'll take anyone, we celebrate it. There's another type. They're really kind of interesting. They want their ideology to be so mainstream. They want everyone to think that girls are stupid and shallow and manipulative and can't love and are lesser humans, but they want to do it through this kind of peaceful means because they want to legitimize it in political thought. Much like we've seen with the far right, there's the angry neo-Nazis who want to do another Waco, and then there's the ones who are in government who are speaking policy language, so this is the policy incel. They're kind of going through this kind of, we hate violence, but we do believe in this, but we'll never be violent, but we believe that women are XYZ. So they seem more palatable. You say, well, I guess they can believe what they want, but what they're doing is they're getting their message out really fast. Guys are believing in what they're saying. I've met young guys who are not incel who start to tell me incel stuff. And I'm like, where are you hearing it? It's because it's mainstreaming so quickly. And then at the end of the day, what that means is a future society where a lot of people do see women as unable to love, manipulative, cruel, shallow, much like the same adjectives you put with anti-Semitism. So that is still a problem. Even though they're not celebrating violence, they're being more manipulative. And secretly, in their own minds, they probably do like a bit of violence. But they're going to be outwardly a little bit more palatable anyway.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that insight. This really helps us do our work as well. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Matt. Any other questions?
I should say, if anyone wants to get in touch for any reason at all, I'm open. You can actually email Groundswell directly, info@Groundswell, and they can put you on to me or Gafar as well if anyone has any further questions about what I was saying today. I do work for Groundswell as well, I should say, so like we are in the same organization. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and someone might have a question. But what's people are still thinking? Can I quickly ask you about gaming? You haven't mentioned gaming yet. Is there? You mentioned popular culture. Was gaming playing an influence in how they see the world?
I found that a lot of incels I spoke to didn't game, which is really interesting. I would have assumed they were gamers. They were anime watchers. They loved a bit of Warhammer. They actually had a lot of, which is again going back to the nerd, which I mean, if anyone is interested in buying the book, the nerd chapter kind of talks a little bit more about the interests of incels. I noticed it was a social club. Sure, they all bond because they hate girls, but they also bond because they love anime, they love this anime, they love this Warhammer, they love that. They have interests that are like primed to be social, because there are other people in the world who are not incels who are getting big into Warhammer clubs, big into anime clubs, big into Comic-Con. So a lot of their interests are aligning with the mainstream zeitgeist. So they are in the mainstream. It's just that, going back to the nerd, they think that everyone who likes these things are the hot nerds and that they've been excluded because they're the ones who are still a bit awkward, still don't know how to talk to people. So they need a little bit more help with kind of, I guess, feeling welcome to the spaces where they already are ready to be. So that's the kind of social bridging that I would love to see more of, and funding in that social bridging. And there has been great funding for some Warhammer clubs in Northern Ireland to help bring men who are autistic together in order to bring socialization. And that is exactly what I think we should see more of for this kind of element as well. Even socializing with boys, that's actually number one, more than girls, having that friend. And then from there on, you feel a bit more better about life.
Sure, that's very interesting. We do have one more final question if anyone has one, otherwise we will wrap it up. Any final questions from anyone? Going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, no final questions. Well, thank you all for attending. Feel free to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. Watch out for future webinars. We'll advertise them on LinkedIn as well. And please subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do from our LinkedIn page as well. So please follow our work, and hopefully we'll put on more exciting seminars for you all to follow. And again, as Maeve said, if you have any follow-up questions or any of the training that we're doing, any of the work and projects we're involved with in community, just reach out to us and we can talk about that as well with you. We're happy to share our work. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to Maeve for presenting.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.